Among many adventures of Tom Sawyer, painting the fence is one of the most enjoyable one. Written by Mark Twain in the year 1876, this classic has an element of humor. The story is set around the author's actual boyhood. Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain is illustrated by Toby Blyth. The book was written and published in the year 1876. It is based where Mark Twain, the author, lived as a boy. This intelligent Tom Sawyer and the mischievous boy is a fun-loving person, but often skips school and goes to swim, and thus he gets punished by his aunt to paint a big fence. But Tom cleverly persuades his friends and trades trinkets and treasure for the privilege of doing this tedious task. He uses the reverse psychology to convince his friends that it is an enjoyable activity. Thus, the story goes on in a most enjoyable manner. Come on, let's go to the story. Tom, no answer. What's gone with that boy Tom? No answer. The old lady pulled her spectacles down and looked over them about the room. Then she pulled them up and looked out under them. She seldom or never looked through them for so small a thing as a boy. They were her state pair, the pride of her heart, and were built for style, not service. She could have seen through a pair of stove lids just as well. She looked perplexed. Perplexed means baffled or very puzzled. She could have seen through a pair of stove lids just as well. She looked perplexed for a moment and then said, not fiercely, but still loud enough for the furniture to hear, "Well, if I get hold of you, I'll..." She did not finish, for by this time she was bending down and punching under the bed with the broom, and so she needed breath to punctuate the punches. Punctuate the punches mean to move on brooming or mopping. She resurrected nothing but the cat. She could not revive anything underneath the bed, but there was a cat. There was a slight noise behind her, and she turned just in time to seize a small boy and arrest his flight. Seize means to catch. Arrest his flight means making the boy to stand and not to run away. There, I might. A thought of that closet. "What you been doing in here?" she asked. "Nothing," said the boy. "Nothing? Look at your hands and look at your mouth. What is that?" I don't know, Aunt Polly." "Well, I know. It's jam." "That's what it is. 40 times I've said if you didn't let that jam alone, I'd skin you. Hand me that switch." The switch hovered in the air. The switch here means the stick Aunt Polly is catching in her hand. The switch hovered in the air. The peril was desperate. That's the boy was desperate. He didn't know what to do. "My, look behind you, Aunt Polly," Tom cried. The old lady whirled around and snatched her skirt out of danger. The lad fled on the instant, scrambled up the high board fence and disappeared over it. His Aunt Polly stood surprised a moment and then broke into a gentle laugh. "Hang the boy! Can't I never learn anything?" Ain't he played me tricks enough like that for me to be looking out for him by this time? But old fools is the biggest fools there is. I ain't doing my duty by that boy, and that's the Lord's truth. Spare the rod and spoil the child, as the good book says. Here the phrase spare the rod and spoil the child means like pampering a child too much and letting him out of control. And that was the same thing that happened with Tom. I'll be obliged to make him work tomorrow to punish him. It's mighty hard to make him work on Saturdays, but he hates work more than he hates anything else. And I've got to do some of my duty by him, or I'll be the ruination of the child. As for Tom, within 2 minutes or even less, he had forgotten all his trouble. Not because his troubles were heavy or bitter to him than a man, but because a new and powerful interest bore them down and drove them out of his mind. This new interest was whistling, which he had just acquired. Diligence and attention soon gave him the knack of it, and he strode down the street with his mouth full of harmony and his soul full of gratitude. Presently, Tom checked his whistle. A stranger was before him, a boy, a shade larger than himself. This boy was well dressed on a weekday. This was simply astounding. His cap was a dainty thing. His close-buttoned blue cloth jacket was new and natty, and so were his pants. He had shoes on, and it was only Friday. He even wore a necktie, a bright bit of ribbon. The more Tom stared at the splendid marvel, the higher he turned up his nose at his finery, and the shabbier and shabbier his own outfit seemed to him to grow. Neither boy spoke. If one moved, the other moved, but only sideways in a circle. They kept face to face and eye to eye all the time. Finally, Tom said, "I can lick you." "I'd like to see you try it," said the boy. "Well, I can do it," Tom said. "No, you can't either," the boy said. "Yes, I can." "No, you can't." "I can." "You can't." In an instant, both boys were rolling and tumbling in the dirt, gripped together like cats, and for the space of a minute they tugged and tore at each other's hair and clothes, punched and scratched each other's noses, and covered themselves with dust and glory. Presently the confusion took form, and through the fog of battle Tom appeared, seated astride the new boy and pounding him with his fists. "Holler, nuff," said he. The boy only struggled to free himself. He was crying, mainly from rage. "Holler, nuff," and the pounding went on. At last, the stranger got out a smothered nuff, and Tom let him up and said, "Now that'll learn you. Better look out who you're fooling with next time." The new boy went off brushing the dust from his clothes, sobbing, snuffling, and occasionally looking back and shaking his head and threatening what he would do to Tom the next time. Tom got home pretty late that night. and when he climbed cautiously in at the window, he uncovered an ambush. Ambush means suddenly someone who hides and attacks. He uncovered an ambush in the person of his aunt, and when she saw the state his clothes were in, her resolution to turn his Saturday holiday into captivity at hard labor became unyielding in its firmness. That is, Aunt Polly decided to make his Saturday holiday into a hard labor by punishing him. Saturday morning was calm, and all the summer world was bright and fresh and brimming with life. There was a song in every heart, and if the heart was young, the music issued at the lips. There was cheer in every face and a spring in every step. The locust trees were in bloom, and the fragrance of the blooms filled the air. Cardiff Hill, beyond the village and above it, was green with vegetation, and it lay just far enough away to seem a detectable land, dreamy, reposeful, and inviting. Tom appeared on the sidewalk with a bucket of whitewash and a long-handled brush. He surveyed the fence. All gladness left him, and a deep melancholy settled down upon his spirit. 30 yards of board fence, 9 feet high, life to him seemed hollow, an existence but a burden. Sighing, he dipped his brush and passed it along the topmost plank. He repeated his operation, did it again, compared the insignificant whitewashed streak with the far-reaching continent of the unwhitewashed fence, and sat down on a tree box discouraged. Jim came skipping out at the gate with a tin pail. He was singing Buffalo Gals. Bringing water from the town pump had always been hateful work in Tom's eyes before, but now it did not strike him so. He remembered that there was company at the pump. Boys and girls were always there waiting their turns, resting, trading, playthings, quarreling, fighting, skylarking. And he remembered that although the pump was only 150 yards off, Jim never got back with a bucket of water under an hour. And even then, somebody generally had to go after him. Tom said, "Say, Jim, I'll fetch you the water if you will do some whitewashing." Jim shook his head and said, "Can't, Master Tom. Old Mrs. She told me I got to go and get this water and not stop fooling around with anybody. She says she's pegged Master Tom going to ask me to whitewash, and so she told me to go along and tend to my own business. She loved she'd tend to the whitewashing." Here I would like to give a small explanation. The tiny African boy here speaks in a slang English, and he tries to explain Tom that his Aunt Polly had asked him to mind his own business, and that Tom might ask him to whitewash, and she said she'll attend to the whitewashing place at any moment, and asked the boy to mind his own business. "Oh, never mind what she said, Jim. That's the way she talks. Give me the bucket. I won't be gone only a minute. She won't ever know." "Oh, I doesn't, Master Tom. Old Mrs. she'd take and tear the head off in me. Indeed she would." Here the little African tiny boy says that he is afraid of Aunt Polly, that she might tear off his head. She never licks anybody. She whacks them over the head with a thimble. But who cares for that? I'd like to know. She talks awful. But talk don't hurt. Jim, I'll give you a marble. I'll give you a white alley. Jim began to waver. White alley, Jim? And it's a bully taw. A taw means it's a special kind of marble. My, that's a might gay marble, I tell you. But Master Tom, I is powerful fraid old missus. And besides, if you will, I will show you my sore toe. Jim was only human. This attraction was too much for him. He put down his pail, took the white alley, and bent over the toe with absorbing interest while the bandage was unwound. In another moment, Jim was flying down the street with his pail and a tingling rear. Tom was whitewashing with vigor, and Aunt Polly was retiring from the field with a slipper in her hand and triumph in her eye. Triumph means victory. But Tom's energy did not last. He began to think of the fun he had planned for this day, and his sorrows multiplied. Soon the free boys would come tripping along all sorts of delicious expeditions, and they would make fun of him for having to work. The very thought of it burnt him like fire. He got out his worldly wealth and examined it. Bits of toys, marbles, and trash. Enough to buy an exchange of work, maybe, but not half enough to buy so much as half an hour of pure freedom. So he returned his meager means to his pocket and gave up the idea of trying to buy the boys. At this dark and hopeless moment, an inspiration burst upon him. It was nothing less than a great, magnificent inspiration. Tom took up his brush and went tranquilly to work. Ben Rogers hove in sight presently, the very boy of all boys whose ridicule Tom had been dreading. Ben was eating an apple and giving a long, melodious whoop at intervals, followed by a deep-toned ding-dong, ding-dong, for he was personating a steamboat. Personating a steamboat means the boy Ben imagined himself to be a steamboat and he was acting as if he was a steamboat, personating a steamboat. As Ben drew near, he slackened speed. He slackened speed means he was coming fast and suddenly he stopped. Tom went on whitewashing and paid no attention to the steamboat. Ben stared a moment and then said, "Hi, you're a stump, ain't you?" No answer. Tom surveyed his last touch with the eye of an artist. Then he gave his brush another gentle sweep and surveyed the result as before. Ben ranged up alongside of him. Tom's mouth watered for the apple, but he stuck to his work. Ben said, "Hello, old chap, you got to work, eh?" Tom wheeled suddenly and said, "Why, it's you, but I wasn't noticing." Ben said, "Say, I'm going swimming." "I am. Don't you wish you could?" "But of course you'd rather work, wouldn't you?" "Of course you would." Tom contemplated the boy a bit and said, "What do you call work?" "Why, ain't that work?" Ben said. Tom resumed his whitewashing and answered carelessly, "Well, maybe it is and maybe it ain't. All I know is it suits Tom Sawyer." "Does a boy get a chance to whitewash a fence every day?" Tom said. That put the thing in a new light. Ben stopped nibbling his apple. Tom swept his brush daintily back and forth, stepped back to note the effect, added a touch here and there, criticized the effect again. Ben was watching every move and getting more and more interested, more and more absorbed. Presently, Ben said, "Say, Tom, let me whitewash a little." Tom considered, was about to consent, but he changed his mind. "Ben, I'd like to, honest Injun." Jim wanted to do it too, but Aunt Polly wouldn't let him. You see, Aunt Polly's awful particular about this fence. Right here on the street, you know. If it was on the back fence, I wouldn't mind, and she wouldn't. Yes, she's awful particular about this fence. It's got to be done very careful. I reckon there ain't one boy in 1,000, maybe 2,000, that can do it the way it's got to be done. No, is that so? Oh, come on now, let me just try. Only just a little, Tom. I'd let you if you was me, Tom. No. Don't you see how I'm fixed? If you was to tackle this fence and anything was to happen to it, oh shucks, I'll just be as careful. Now let me try. See, I'll give you the core of my apple. Well, here, no, Ben. Now don't. I'm afraid. I'll give you all of it, Ben said. Tom gave up the brush with reluctance in his face, but eagerness in his heart. And while Ben worked and sweated in the sun, the retired artist sat on a barrel in the shade close by, dangled his legs, munched his apple, and planned the slaughter of more innocents. There was no lack of material. Boys happened along every little while. They came to jeer, but remained to whitewash. By the time Ben was tired out, Tom had traded the next chance to Billy Fisher for a kite in a good repair. And when he played out, Johnny Miller bought in for a dead rat and a string to swing it with, and so on, hour after hour. And when the middle of the afternoon came, from being a poor, poverty-stricken boy in the morning, Tom was literally rolling in wealth. He had, besides the things before mentioned, 12 marbles, a jaws sharp, a piece of blue bottle glass to look through, a spool cannon, a key that wouldn't unlock anything, a fragment of chalk, a glass topper of a decanter, a tin soldier, a couple of tadpoles, 6 firecrackers, a kitten with one eye, a brass door knob, a dog collar but no dog, the handle of a knife, 4 pieces of orange peel, and a dilapidated old window sash. He had a nice, good, ideal time all the while, plenty of company, and the fence had 3 coats of whitewash on it. If he hadn't run out of whitewash, he would have bankrupted every boy in the village. Tom said to himself that it was not such a hollow world. After all, he had discovered a great law of human action without knowing it, namely, that in order to make a man or a boy covet a thing, it is only necessary to make the thing. It is necessary to make a thing difficult to attain. If he had been a great and a wise philosopher like the writer of this story, he would now have comprehended that work consists of whatever a body is obliged to do, and that play consists of whatever a body is not obliged to do. Coming to the concluding part, I advise learners to make use of the vocabulary, make sentences using them, and it is sure that this story enhances the reader's English knowledge. We'll meet you with another fascinating classic. Thank you for watching the video. If you like this video, please do subscribe, share, and post your comment. Thank you.